Hey everyone, Professor Snart checking in on Monday morning here. Hopefully you had a good weekend, probably busy, like mine was, just keeping up with stuff. We're into week 2 of our 5-week course already, so that first week zipped by and that's week 1 in the books. So we've done introductions and then looked at our first unit, sort of content unit, which is unit 2 on creation myths. Those were due on Friday, and now we're working towards unit 3 on Tuesday, June 5th. And then Unit 4 coming up pretty soon afterwards on Thursday, June 7th. So we get into, again, some more of the reading or the content stuff for the course. And as with the creation myths, really starting in many ways at the beginning. So we read a couple of interesting works here, looking at not so much discussions of, like we'd seen in the creation myths reading, which were very much about the relationship of the sort of social body to the divine, or mankind, humankind, whatever. Although those certainly show up in the readings for this week, which are Epic of Gilgamesh and the Aeneid. But here we're a little bit more interested specifically in the figure of the hero as the main kind of character in these early works. And again, something like the Epic of Gilgamesh is early. It is the earliest in some ways. It goes back about as far as you can go in terms of literature. So you'll notice that that has practical implications, because the text we have in our textbook is, is literally broken in places because, the tablets it was first written on were broken, and the sort of translations of that, which is how we eventually finally get not just the epic, but our ability to read that language even through multiple translations in multiple different media, whether it's those early clay tablets or finally writing on paper, which really came quite a bit later. But anyway, some of the practical implications of just the archaeology of the whole thing begin to really show up here, where huge pieces of the text are just missing, or scholars have to guess about what naming conventions are going on, or what narratively might have happened in these gaps between pieces of the text. So it can be challenging to read, but I think you still get the basic idea of sort of what's happening here. And then the Aeneid is by Virgil, and it tells basically about the hero of Aeneas and then the founding of Rome. So it is, again, one of those early epics that is foundational in just about every sense. It develops this kind of character who becomes foundational for a social body. It talks about the founding of cities, or really of nation states. And as with more contemporary epics, and by contemporary I mean like Paradise Lost, a couple of 100 years old, instead of thousands of years old. They're epic in the sense that they look to encapsulate everything there is to talk about a culture at a particular time, or to trace back to foundational roots, why a culture or society looks the way it does at a particular time. But again, we're interested here in the figure of the hero and exactly what that means and how that character behaves. And I think this is a good moment to reflect on our sometimes our habit of understanding literature as this progression from very simple, simplistic, basic stories about very stock characters. There's good, there's bad, there's a contest between the two, good wins, and we move on to the next thing. So that's early literature, and then we imagine it gets progressively more complex and complicated, and now we have very complicated heroes they seem to be good, but they're equally bad, and their motives aren't always as pure as they should be. They have just as many secrets as things that are, open and role modelish about them. But that is totally not true, and you'll see that immediately in the unit here, in terms of some of the comments that I have and some of the background stuff here. But then in terms of the readings themselves, someone like Gilgamesh from the epic, I mean, God, he'd be tough to be around at the best of times. He's anything but a hero or a role model in some of the simplistic terms that we think of that. So it is really important not to assume that because the earliest writing was produced using very basic technology, or very few people were literate, right? Why would you be, honestly? Like, what good would it do you? Obviously, very few people could write. The utensils of writing were expensive and fragile and all that kind of stuff. So that part it developed and became more sophisticated, but it doesn't mean that literary impulses to create epic narratives, to create complex character interactions, for example, are just something of the recent present. They go back, in fact, to the earliest literatures that we have. And like I suggested in some of the background here, one of the things that this unit really encourages us to do is to think about certain basic assumptions of, like, what is a hero. We might think of that as one of those, universals, right? The masterpieces of world literature introduces us to these universal concepts like the hero. What we see almost immediately is it's just not true. The idea of a hero changes often very quickly throughout time, throughout long scopes of time, but also within decades within a particular culture. The examples in the unit here, I think, will remind us of that immediately. And so the hero, or the idea of a hero, is a really great benchmark or indicator of what kind of situation a culture, speaking very generally, kind of finds itself in, and why does it imagine heroes in the way that it does. Does an era of very dark, mysterious, secretive, kind of damaged goods sort of heroes, does that reflect a certain age that a culture is either going through or has recently gone through, and then kind of therapeutically imagines for itself these new sort of heroes? And again, these things change over the very long course of history, but also quite quickly within kind of more specific cultural instances. So something to think about as you're doing the more specific work of reading the epics that we're looking at for this this particular unit. Okay, so there's lots of background. Obviously, reading is a heavy component here. Another discussion board essay, looking for you to think about, again, issues of the hero, of sort of complexity of character, which is something that, like I said, I don't want us to assume that because the tools of literature thousands of years ago were relatively simple, that the writing itself is simple or somehow lacks nuance, or whatever the case might be, or that somehow we are at a point where things are better, quote unquote. That becomes a really sort of challenging assumption to make. So if you haven't been doing so already, be sure you look through a number of the discussion board essays that people are posting there. Some of them are really, really good. They are fully developed. Introduction, body paragraphs, at least 3 of them, so you're developing a number of ideas. A formal conclusion, there's a clear thesis that's been developed, there's quotation throughout, so that gets you full points. And if you didn't get full points, I would encourage you first to maybe look at some other examples and just see how you measure up. Again, some of the work that's produced is like not sophisticated, but polished final draft sort of essay material. It's really good. Of course, you're responding officially to at least a couple of them here, but I would especially encourage you to read through a little more broadly, if time permits. I know that's a challenge for us in the 5-week term. Okay, so I'll be back in touch within the next couple of days. If you have any questions or concerns going on, be in touch with me and I will get back to you as soon as I can.